Good wishes to all of you. Social Science, India and the Contemporary World 1 textbook in history for class ninth. Section 2, Livelihoods, Economics and Societies. In Section 2, we will shift our focus on the study of livelihoods and economics. We will look at how the lives of forest dwellers and pastoralists changed in the modern world and how they played a part in shaping these changes. All too often, in looking at the emergence of the modern world, we only focus on factories and cities, on the industrial and agriculture sectors, which supply the market, but we forget that there are other economics outside these sectors. Other people too, who matter to the nation, to modern eyes, the life of pastoralists and forest dwellers. The shifting cultivators and food gatherers often seem to be stuck in the past. It is as if their lives are not important when we study the emergence of the contemporary world. The chapters in section 2 will suggest that we need to know about their lives, so how they organize their world and operate their economies. These communities are very much part of the modern world we live in today. They are not simply survivors from a bygone era. Chapter 4 will take you into the forest and tell you about the variety of ways the forests were used by communities living within them. It will show how in the 19th century the growth of industries and urban centers, ships and railways created a new demand on the forest for timber and other forest products. New demands led to new rulers of forest use, new ways of organizing the forest. You will see how colonial control was established over the forests, how forest areas were mapped, trees were classified, and plantations were developed. All these developments affected the lives of those local communities who used forest resources. They were forced to operate within new systems and recognize their lives. But they also rebelled against the rulers and persuaded the state to change its policies. The chapter will give you an idea of the history of such developments in India and Indonesia. Chapter 5 will track the movements of the pastoralists in the mountains and deserts, in the plains and plateaus of India and Africa. Pastoral community in both these areas from an important segment of the population, and we rarely study their lives. Their histories do not enter the page of textbooks. Chapter 5 will show how their lives were affected by the controls established over the forest. The expansion of agriculture and the decline of grazing fields, it will tell you about the patterns of their movements, their relationship or to other communities, and the way they just adjust to changing situations. We cannot understand the making of the contemporary world unless we begin to see the changes in the lives of diverse communities and people. We also cannot understand the problem of modernization unless we look at its impact on the environment. Forest society and colonialism. Take a look at figure 1, a sal forest in Chhattisgarh. Look at the different heights of the trees and plants in this picture and the variety of species. This is a dense forest, so very little sunlight falls on the forest floor. Take a quick look around your school and home and identify the things that come from forests. The paper in the book you are reading, desk and table, doors and windows, the dyes that color your clothes, spices in your food, the, cell, the cellophane wrapper of your toffee, tend to live in beads, gum, honey, coffee, tea, and rubber. Do not miss out the oil in chocolates, which comes from sal seeds. The tannin used to convert skins and hides into leather, or the herbs and roots used for medicinal purposes. Forests also provide bamboo wood for fuel, grass charcoal packing fruits, flowers, animals, birds, and many other things. In the Amazon forest or in the Western Ghats, it is possible to find as many as 500 different plant species in one forest patch. A lot of the diversity is fast disappearing between 1700 and 1995, the period of industrialization. 13.9 million square kilometers of forest or 9.3% of the world's total area was cleared for industrial uses, cultivation, pastures, and fuelwood. 1. Why deforestation? Take a look at figure 2. When the valleys were full, painting by John Dawson. Native Americans like the Lakota tribe who lived in the great North American plains have had a diversified economy. They cultivated maize, foraged for wild plants, and hunted bison. Keeping vast areas open for the bison to ranch in was seen by the English settlers as wasteful. After the 1860s, the bisons were killed in large numbers. The disappearance of forest is referred to as deforestation. Deforestation is not a recent problem. The process began many centuries ago, but under colonial rule it became more systematic and extensive. Let us look at some of the cases of deforestation in India. Land to be improved. In 1600, approximately one sixth of India's landmass was under cultivation. Now that figure has gone up to about half. As population increased over the centuries and the demand for food went up, peasants extended the boundaries of cultivation, clearing forest and breaking new land. In the colonial period, cultivation expanded rapidly for a variety of reasons. First, the British directly encouraged the production of commercial crops like jute, sugar, wheat, and cotton. The demands for these crops increased in 19th century Europe for food grains were needed to feed the growing urban population and raw materials were required for industrial production. Second, in the early 19th century, the colonialists thought that forests were unproductive. They were considered to be wilderness that had to be brought under cultivation so that the land could yield agriculture products and revenue and enhance the income of the state. So between 1880 and 1920, cultivated area rose by 6.7 million hectares. We always see the expansion of cultivation as a sign of progress, but we should not forget that for land to be brought under the plugs, forests have to be cleared. Sleepers on the tracks. Take a look at figure 3. Converting sal logs into sleepers in the Singhbhum forests, Chota Nagpur, May 1897. Adivasis were hired by the forest department to cut trees and make smooth planks which would serve as sleepers for the railways. At the same time, they were not allowed to cut these trees to build their own houses. Box 1. The absence of cultivation in a place does not mean the land was uninhabited. In Australia, when the white settlers landed, they claimed that the continent was empty or terra nullius. In fact, they were guided through the landscape by aboriginal tracks and led by aboriginal guides. The different aboriginal communities in Australia had clearly demarcated territories. The Nagendrajari people of Australia plotted their land along the symbolical body of the first ancestor Nugrinda Devi. This land included 5 different environments: saltwater, riverine tracts, lakes, bush and desert, plains, which satisfy different socio-economic needs. New words: sleepers. Wooden planks laid across railway tracks. They hold the tracks in position. Source A. The idea that uncultivated land had to be taken over the improved was popular with colonizers everywhere in the world. It was an argument that justified a conquest. In 1896, the American writer Richard Harding wrote on the Honduras in Central America. There is no more interesting questions of the present day than that of what is to be done with the world's land which is lying unimproved. Whether it shall go to the great power that is willing to turn it to account, or remain with its original owner who fails to understand its value. The Central Americans are like a gang of semi barbarians in a beautiful furnished house, of which they can understand neither its possibilities of comfort nor its use. 3 years later, the American owned United Fruit Company was founded and grew bananas on a industrial scale in Central America. The company acquired such power over the governments of these countries that they came to be known as banana republics. Quoted in David Spur, The Rhetoric of Empire 1993. By the early 19th century, oak forests in England were disappearing. This created a problem of timber supply for the Royal Navy. How could English ships be built without a regular supply of strong and durable timber? How could imperial power be protected and maintained without ships? By the 1820s, such parties were sent to explore the forest resources of India. Within a decade, trees were being felled on a massive scale and vast quantities of timber were being exported from India. Take a look at figure 4, bamboo rafts being floated down the Kasalong River Chittagong Hill tracts. Take a look at figure 5, elephants building squares of timber at a timber yard in Rangoon. In the colonial period, elephants were frequently used to lift heavy timber both in the forest and at the timber yards. The spread of railways from the 1850s credited a new demand. Railways were essential for colonial trade and for the movement of imperial troops. To run locomotives, wood was needed as fuel, and to lay railway line sleepers were essential to hold the tracks together. Each mile of railway track required both 1760 and 2000 sleepers. From the 1860s, the railway network expanded rapidly. By 1819, about 25,500 kilometers of track had been laid. In 1946, the length of the tracks had increased to over 765,000 kilometers. As the railway tracks spread through India, a larger number of trees were felled. As early as the 1850, in the Madras Presidency alone, 35,000 trees were being cut annually for sleepers. The government gave out contracts to individuals to supply the required quantities. These contractors began cutting trees indiscriminately. Forest around the railway tracks fast started disappearing. Activity: each mile of railway track required between 1,760 and 2,000 sleepers. If one average sized 3 yields 3 to 5 sleepers for a 3-meter wide broad gauge track, calculate approximately how many trees would have to be cut to lay 1 mile of track. Take a look at figure 6, woman returning home after collecting fuel wood. Take a look at figure 7, truck carrying logs. When the forest department decided to take up an area for logging, one of the first things it did was to build wide roads so that trucks could enter. Compare this to the forest tracks along which people walk to collect the fuel wood and other minor forest produce. Many such trucks of wood go from forest arrests areas to big cities. The new line to be constructed was the Indus Valley Railway between Multan and Sukkar, a distance of nearly 300 miles at the rate of 2000 sleepers per mile. This would require 6 lakh sleepers 10 feet by 10 inches by 5 inches or 3.5 cubic feet apiece, being upwards of 2,000 cubic feet. The locomotives would fuel at the rate of one train daily either way and at one mount per train mile. An annual supply of 219,000 mounts would be demanded. In addition, a large supply of fuel for brick burning would be required. The sleepers would have to come mainly from the Sindh forests, the fuel from the tamarisk and Jan forest of Sindh and the Punjab. The other new line was the Northern State Railway from Lahore to Multan. It was estimated that two 200,000 sleepers would be required for its construction. E.P. Stebbing, The Forest of India, Volume 2, 1923. Plantations. Large areas of natural forest were also cleared to make way for tea, coffee, and rubber plantations to meet Europe's growing need for these commodities. The colonial government took over the forest and gave vast areas to European planters at a cheap rate. These areas were enclosed and cleared of forest and planted with tea or coffee. Pleasure Brandy. Take a look at figure 8. Pleasure Brandy. The London and Glasgow tea imported essentials superb taste too. The rise of commercial forestry activity. If you were the government of India in 1862 and responsible for supplying the railways with sleepers and fuel on such a large scale, what were the steps you would have taken? Take a look at figure 9. One acre of a managed poplar forest in Tuscany, Italy. Poplar forests are good mainly for timber. They are not used for leaves, fruits or other products. Look at the straight lines of trees, all of the uniform height. This is the model that scientific forestry has promoted. In the previous section, we have seen that the British needed a forest in order to build ships and railways. The British were worried that the use of forest by local people and the reckless felling of tree by traders would destroy forests. So they decided to invite a German expert, Dietrich Brandis, for advice and made him the first Inspector General of Forests in India. Brandis realized that a proper system had to be introduced to manage the forest and people had to be trained in the science of conservation. The system would need legal sanction. Rules about the use of forest resources had to be framed. Felling of trees and grazing had to be restricted so that forest could be preserved for timber production. Anybody who cut trees without following the system had to be had to be punished. So Brandis set up the Indian Forest Service in 1864 and helped formulate the Indian Forest Act of 1865. The Imperial Forest Research Institute was set up at Dehradun in 1906. The system they taught here was called scientific forestry. Many people now, including ecologists, feel that the system is not scientific at all. Take a look at figure 10, a deodar plantation in Kangra, 1933, from Indian Forest Records, volume 15. Take a look at figure 11, the Imperial Forest School, Dehradun, India. The first forestry school to be graduated in the British Empire from Indian Forest, volume 31. New words. Scientific forestry, a system of Cutting trees controlled by the forest department, in which old trees are cut and new ones planted. In scientific forest and natural forest, which had lots of different types of trees, were cut down. In their place, one type of trees was planted in straight rows. This is called a plantation. Forest officials surveyed the forest, estimated the area under different types of trees, and made working plans for forest management. They planned how much of the plantation area to cut every year. The area cut was then to be replanted so that it was ready to be cut again in some years. After the Forest Act was enacted in 1865, it was amended twice, once in 1878 and then in 1927. The 1878 Act divided forests into three categories: reserved, protected, and village forests. The best forests were called reserved forests. Villagers could not take anything from these forests, even for their own use, for house building or fuel. They could take wood from protected or village forests. How are the lives of people affected? Foresters and villagers had very different ideas of what a good forest should look like. Villagers wanted forest with a mixture of species to satisfy different needs. Fuel, fodder, leaves. The forest department, on the other hand, wanted trees which were suitable for building ships or railways. They needed trees that could provide hardwood and were tall and straight. So, particular species like teak and sal were promoted and others were cut. Take a look at figure 12, collecting mahua, maduka, indica from the forest. Villagers wake up before dawn and go to the forest to collect the mahua flowers which have fallen on the forest floor. Mahua trees are precious. Mahua flowers can be eaten or used to make alcohol. The seeds can be used to make oil. Take a look at figure 13. Drying tendu leaves. The sales of tendu leaves is a major source of income for many people living in forests. Each bundle contains approximately 50 leaves, and if a person works very hard, they can perhaps collect as many as 100 bundles in a day. Women, children, and old men are the main collectors. In forest areas, people use forest produce products, roots, leaves, fruits, and tubers for many things. Fruits and tubers are nutritious to eat, especially during the monsoon before the harvest has come in. Herbs are used for medicine, wood for agriculture implements like yokes and plugs. Bamboo makes excellent fences and is also used to make baskets and umbrellas. A dried scooped out gourd can be used as a portable water bottle. Almost everything is available in the forest. Leaves can be stitched together to make disposable plates and cups. The Scythe Bobhinia Wahli creeper can be used to make ropes, and the thorny bark of the semur silk cotton tree is used to grave vegetables, oil for cooking, and to light camps can be preserved from the fruit of the mahua tree. The Forest Act means a severe hardship for villagers across the country. After the act, all their everyday practices, cutting wood for their houses, grazing their cattle, collecting fruits and roots, hunting and fishing, became illegal. People were now forced to steal wood from the forest, and if they were caught, they were at the mercy of the forest guards who would take bribes from them. Women who collected fuel wood were especially worried. It was also common for police constables and forest guards to harass people by demanding free food from them. Take a look at figure 14, bringing grain from the threshing grounds to the field. The men are carrying grain in baskets from the threshing fields. Men carry the baskets slung on a pole across their shoulders, while women carry the baskets on their heads. Activity. Children living around forest areas can often identify hundreds of species of trees and plants. How many species of trees can you name? Take a look at figure 15. Tangy cultivation was the system in which local farmers were allowed to cultivate temporarily within a plantation. In this photo taken in Tharwadi division in Burma in 1921, the cultivators are sowing paddy. The men make holes in the soil using long bamboo poles with iron tips. The women saw paddy in each hole. How did forest rules affect cultivation? One of the major impacts of European colonialism was one on the practice of shifting cultivation or switching agriculture. This is a traditional agriculture practice in many parts of Asia. Africa and South America, it has many local names such as lading in Southeast Asia, milpa in Central America, chitmint or tavi in Africa, and Chena in Sri Lanka. In India, Dhya, Pendu, Penda, Beaver, Nevad, Jam, Podu, Kandad, and Kumri are some of the local terms for Sweden agriculture. In shifting cultivation, parts of the forest are cut and burnt in rotation. Seeds are sown in the ashes after the first monsoon rains, and the crop is harvested by October November. Such plots are cultivated for a couple of years and then left fallow for 12 to 18 years for the forest to grow back. A mixture of crops is grown on these plots. In central India and Africa. It could be millets. In Brazil, manico, and in other parts of Latin America, maize and beans. European forests regarded this practice as harmful for the forests. They felt that land which was used for cultivation every few years could not grow trees for railway timber. When a forest was burned, there was there was the added danger of the flame spreading and burning valuable timber. Take a look at figure 16, burning the forest penda or podu plot. In shifting cultivation, a clearing is made in the forest, usually on the slopes of hills. After the trees have been cut, they are burned to provide ashes. The seeds are then scattered in the area and left to be irrigated by the rain. Take a look at figure 17, the little fisherman. Children accompany their parents to the forest and learn early how to fish, collect forest produce, and cultivate. The bamboo trap which the boy is holding in his right hand is kept at the mouth of a stream. The fish flow into it. Shifting cultivation also made it harder for the government to calculate taxes. Therefore, the government decided to ban shifting cultivation. As a result, many communities were forcibly displaced from their homes in the forest. Some had to change occupations while some resisted through large and small rebellions. Who could hunt? The new forest laws changed the lives of forest dwellers in yet another way. Before the forest laws, many people who lived in or near forest had survived by hunting deer, partridges, and a variety of small animals. This customary practice was prohibited by the forest laws. Those who were caught hunting were now publishing for poaching, which the forest laws deprive people of their customary rights to hunt. Hunting of big game became a sport in India. Hunting of tigers and other animals had been part of the culture of the court and nobility for centuries. Many Mughal paintings show princes and emperors enjoying a hunt. But under colonial rule the scale of hunting increased to such an extent that various species become almost extinct. The British saw large animals as signs of a wild, primitive, and savage society. They believed that by killing dangerous animals, the British. Take a look at figure 18, Lord Reading hunting in Nepal. Count the dead tigers in this photo. When British colonial officials and Rajas went hunting, they were accompanied by a whole retinue of servants. Usually, the tracking was done by skilled village hunters, and the Sahib simply fired the shot. Would civilize India. They gave rewards for the killing of tigers, owls, and other large animals on the grounds that they posed a threat to cultivators. Over 80,000 tigers, 15,000 sorry 1,50,000 leopards and 2 lakh wolves were killed for reward in the period 1875 to 1925. Gradually, the tiger came to be seen as a sporting trophy. The Maharaja of Sarguna alone shot 1,157 tigers and sorry Sarguna alone shot 1,157 tigers and 2,000 leopards up to 1957. A British administrator's George L. killed 400 tigers. Entirely certain areas of forest were reserved for hunting. Only much later did environmental and conservators being to argue that all these species of animals needed to be protected and not killed. Take a look at Sorsi. Baigas are a forest community of central India. In 1892, after their shifting cultivation was stopped, they petitioned to the government. We daily starve, having had no food grain in our possessions. The only wealth we possess is our axe. We have no clothes to cover our body with but the past cold nights by the fireside. We are now dying for want of food. We cannot go elsewhere. What fault have we done that the government does not take care of us? Prisoners are supplied with ample food in jail. A cultivator of the grass is now deprived of his holding, but the government does not give us our right who have lived here for generations past. Verrier Elvin, 1939, cited, cited in Madhav Gadgil and Ramachandra Guha. This featured land and ecological, ecological history of India. New trades, new employments, and new services. While people lost out in many ways after the forest department took control of the forest, some people benefited from the new opportunities that had opened up in trade. Many communities left their traditional occupations and started trading in forest produce products. This happened not only in India but across the world. For example, with the growing demand for rubber in the mid 19th century, the Mundurko peoples of the Brazilian Amazon who lived in villages on high ground and cultivated manic began to collect taxes from white rubber trees from supplying to traders. Gradually, they decided to live in trading posts and become completely dependent on traders. In India, the trade in forest produce was not new. From the medieval period onwards, we have records of Adivasi communities trading elephants and other goods like hides, horns, silk cocoons, ivory, bamboo, species, fibers, grasses, gums, and designs through nomadic communities like the Banjaras. Take a look at source D. Rubber extraction in the Putumayo. Everywhere in the world, conditions of work in plantations were horrific. The extraction of rubber in the Putumayo region on the Amazon by the Peruvian Rubber Company with British and Peruvian interests was dependent on the forced labor of the local Indians called Haitots. From 1900 to 1912, the Putumayo output of 4,000 tons of rubber was associated with a decrease of some 30,000 among the Indian population due to torture, disease, and flight. A letter by an employee of a rubber company describes how the rubber was collected. The manager summoned hundreds of
Indians to the station. He grasped his carbine and machete and began the slaughter of these defenseless Indians, leaving the ground covered with 150 corpses, among them men, women, and children. Bathed in blood and appealing for mercy, the survivors were heaped with the death and burned to death. While the manager shouted, I want to exterminate all the Indians who do not obey my orders about the rubber that I required them to bring in. Michael Tossing, Culture of Terror, Space of Death in Nicola Dirks at Colonialism and Culture 1992. With the coming of the British, however, trade was completely regulated by the government. The British government gave many large European trading firms the sole right to trade in the forest products of particular areas. Grazing and hunting by local people were restricted. In the process, many pastoralists and nomadic communities like the Korava, Karacha, and Erikula of the Madras Presidency lost their livelihoods. Some of them began to be called criminal tribes and were forced to work instead in factories, mines, and plantations under government supervision. New opportunities of work did not always mean improved well being for the people. In Assam, both men and women for forest communities like Santalas and Orans from Jharkhand and Gonds from Chhattisgarh were recruited to work on tea plantations. Their wages were low and conditions of work were very bad. They could not return easily to their home villages from where they had been recruited. 3. Rebellion in the forest. In many parts of India and across the world, forest communities rebelled against the changes that were being imposed on them. The leaders of these movements against the British, like Sidhu and Khanu in the Santala Parganas, Birsa Munda of Chota Nagpur, or Alluri Sitaramaraju of Andhra Pradesh, are still remembered today in songs and stories. We will now discuss in detail one such rebellion which took place in the kingdom of Batsar in 1910. Take a look at figure 20, Batsara in 2000. In 1947, Batsar kingdom was merged with Khankar kingdom and became bastard district in Madhya Pradesh. In 1998, it was divided again into three districts, Kanker, Batsar, and Dantewada. In 2001, these became part of Chhattisgarh. The 1910 rebellion first started in the Kangar forest area, encircled and soon spread to other parts of the state. Take a look at figure 19, Army Camp in Batsar 1910. This photography of an army camp was taken in Batsar in 1910. The army moved with tents, cooks the soldiers here. Sepoy is guarding the camp against rebels. The people of Batsar. Batsar is located in the southernmost part of Chhattisgarh and borders Andhra Pradesh, Orissa, and Maharashtra. The central part of Batsar is on a plateau. To the north of the plateau is the Chhattisgarh plain, and to its is the Godavari plain. The river Indravati winds across Batsar east to west. A number of different communities live in Batsar, such as Maira and Maurya Gonds, Durvas, Batras, and Halbas. They speak different languages but share common customs and beliefs. The people of Batsar believe that each village was given its land by the earth, and in return, they look after the earth by making some offerings at each agriculture festival. Additional to the earth, they show respect to the spirits of the river, the forest, and the mountain. Since each village knows where its boundaries lie, the local people look for after all the natural resources within the boundary. If people from a village want to take some wood from the forest of another village. They pay a small fee called Devsari dand or man in exchange. Some villages also protect their forests by engaging watchmen, and each household contributes some grain to pay them. Every year there is one big hunt where the headmen of villages in a pargana cluster of villages meet and discuss issues of concern including forests. Source E. Bhondia collected 400 men, sacrificed a number of goats, and started of it intercept the Divan who was expected to return from the directions of Bijapur. This mob started on the 10th February, burned the Margana school, police school, the police post, lines and pound at Kelser, Kessler, and the school at Tokalpal. Raju detached a contingent to burn Karanji school and captured a head constable and four constables of the state reserve police who had been sent out to escort the Divan and bring him in. The mob did not maltreat the guards seriously but eased them off their weapons and let them go. One party of rebels under Bhontia Mazi went off to the Koya river to block the passage. There in case the Divan left the main road. The rest went on to Tilmil to stop the main road from Bijapur. Buddha Mahasi and Harchan Naik led the main body. Letter from Dibret, political agent Chhattisgarh, Federated States to Commissioner Chhattisgarh Division 23 June 1910. The fears of the people. When the colonial government proposed to reserve two-thirds of the forest in 1905 and stop shifting cultivation, hunting and collection of forest produce, the people of Butsar were very worried. Some villages were allowed to stay on in the reserved forest on the condition that they worked free for the forest department in cutting and transporting trees and protecting the forest from fires. Subsequently, this came to be known as forest villages. People of other villages were displaced without any notice or compensation for long. Villagers had been suffering from increased and rents and frequent demands of for free labor and goods by colonial officials. They came the terribly famines in 1899, 1900, and again in 1907, 1908. Reservations proved to be the last straw. People began to gather and discuss these issues in their village councils, in bazaars, and at festivals or wherever the headmen and priest of several villages were assembled. The initiative was taken by the Durvas of the Kangar forest, where reservation first took place. Although there was no single leader, many people speaks of Gundathur from village Netnar as an important figure in the movement. In 1910, Mango bought a lump of earth chills and arrows. Began circulation between villages. These were actually messages inviting villagers to rebel against the British. Every village contributed something to the rebellion expenses. Bazaars were looted, contributed something to the rebellion expenses. Banjaras were looted the houses of officials and traders. Schools and police stations were burnt and robbed, and grain redistributed. Most of those who were attacked were in some way associated with the colonial state and its oppressive laws. William Ward, a missionary who observed the events, wrote from all directions came streaming into Jagdalpur, police, merchants, forest peons, schoolmasters, and immigrants. Source F. Elders living in a Bachelor recounted the story of this battle they had heard from their parents. Podhyami Ganga of Kankapal was told by his father Podhyami Tokeli that the British came and started taking land. The Raja didn't pay attention to things happening around him. So seeing that land was being taken, his supporters gathered people. We started, his staunch supporters died, and the rest were whipped. My father, Purshami Tokeli, suffered many strokes, but he escaped and survived. It was a moment to get rid of the British. The British used to tie them to horse and pull them. From every village, two or three people went to Jagdalpur, Gargideva, and Michael of Chitbal, Dole, and Adribundi of Markamis, Vedapandu of Baleras, Unga of Palem, and many others. Similarly, Chandru, an elder from village Nandrasa, said, on the people's side were the sorry on the people's side were the big elders Mille Mudal of Palem, Soekal Durva of Nandras, and Pandva Mazhi. People from every Padgana camped in Aldar Tarai. The Paltan force surrounded the people in a flash. Gundadhar had flying powers and flew away. But what could those with bows and arrows do? The battle took place at night. The people hid in shrubs and crawled away. The army Paltan also ran away. All those who remained alive of the people somehow found their way home to their villages. The British sent troops to suppress the rebellion. The Adivasi leaders tried to negotiate, but the British surrounded their camps and fired upon them. After that, they marched through the villages, flogging and punishing those who had taken part in the rebellion. Most villages were deserted as people fled into the jungles. It took 3 months, February to May, for the British to regain control. However, they never managed to capture Gundadhar. In a major victory for the rebels, work on reservations was temporarily suspended and the area to be reserved was reduced to roughly half of that planned before 1910. The story of the forest and people of Batsar does not end there. After independence, the same practice of keeping people out of the forest and reserving them for industrial use continued. In the 1970s, the World Bank proposed that 4,600 hectares of natural sal forest should be replaced by tropical pine to provide pulp for the paper industry. It was only after protests by local environments that the project was stopped. Let us now go to another part of Asia, Indonesia, and see what was happening there over the same period. 4. Forest transformation in Java. Java is the famous as a rice producing island in Indonesia, but once upon a time it was covered mostly with forests. The colonial power in Indonesia were the Dutch, and as we will see, there were many similarities in the laws for forest control in Indonesia and India. Java in Indonesia is where the Dutch started forest management like the British. They wanted timber from Java to build ships. In 1600, the population of Java was an estimated 3.4 million. There were many villages in the fertile plains, but there were also many communities living in the mountains and practicing shifting cultivation. The Woodcutters of Java. The Kalangs of Java were a community of skilled forest cutters and shifting cultivators. They were so valuable that in 1755, when the
Matharam kingdom of Java split. The 6,000 Kalang families were equally divided between the two kingdoms. Without their expertise, it would have been difficult to harvest teak and for the kings to build their palaces. When the Dutch began to gain control over the forest in the 18th century, they tried to make the Kalangs work under them. In 1770, the Kalangs resisted by attacking a Dutch fort at Jonia, but the uprising was suppressed. Take a look at figure 21, train transporting teak out of the forest, late colonial period. Dutch scientific forestry. In the 19th century, when it became important to control territory and not just people, the Dutch enacted from forest laws in Java restricting villagers' access to forests. Now wood could only be cut off specified purpose like making riverboats or constructing houses, and only from specific forest under close supervision. Villages were punished for grazing cattle in young stands, transporting wood without a permit, or traveling on forest roads with horse carts or cattle. As in India, the need to manage forests for shipbuilding and railway led to the introduction of a forest service in 1882. 280,000 sleepers were exported from Java alone. However, all this required labor to cut the trees, transport the logs, and prepare the sleepers. The Dutch first imposed rents on land being cultivated in the forest and then exempted some villages from these rents if they worked collectively to provide free labor and buffaloes for cutting and transporting timber. This was known as the Blankdong Dinston system. Later, instead of rent exemption, forest villagers were given small wages, but their right to cultivate forest and land was restricted. Source G. Dirkwang Hogendrop, an official of the United East India Company in colonial Java, said, Batavians be amazed here with wonder what I have to communicate. Our fleets are destroyed, our trade languishes, our navigation is going to ruin. We purchase with immense treasures, timber and other materials for ship buildings from the northern powers, and on Java we leave Varkel and mercantile squatters with their roots in the ground. As the forest of Java have timber enough to build a respectable navy in a short time, besides as many merchant ships as we require. In spite of all the cutting, the forests of Java grow as fast as they are cut and would be inaccessible under good care and management. Dirkwan Hogendrop cited in Peluso Rich Forest, Poor People 1992. Salmon's Challenge. Around 1890, Surantico salmon of Randall Plantung village, a teak forest village, began questioning state ownership of the forest. He argued that the state had not created the wind, water, earth, and wood, so it could not own it. Soon a widespread movement developed among us. Those who helped organize it were Salmon's son-in-law. By 1907, 3,000 families were following his ideas. Some of the Samnists protested by lying down on their land when the Dutch came to survey it, while others refused to pay taxes or fines or perform labor. Take a look at figure 22. Most of Indonesia forests are located in islands like Sumatra, Kalimantan, and West Iran. However, Java is where the Dutch began their scientific forestry. The island, which is now famous for rice production, was only richly covered with teak. Take a look at figure 23. Indian Munshins board were timber sleepers piled at Soleil Pagoda ready for shipment 1917. The Allies would not have been as successful in the First World War and the Second World War if they had not been able to exploit the resources and people of their colonies. Both the world wars had a devastating effect on the forests of India, Indonesia, and elsewhere. The forest department cut freely to satisfy war needs. Take a look at figure 24. Logyard in Rembang under Dutch colonial rule. War and deforestation. The First World War and the Second World War had a major impact on forests. In India, working plants were abundant at this time, and the forest department cut trees freely to meet British war needs. In Java, just before the Japanese occupied the region, the Dutch followed a scorched earth policy, destroying sawmills and burning huge piles of green teak logs so that they would not fall into Japanese hands. The Japanese then exploited the forest recklessly for their own war industries. Forcing forest villagers to cut down forests, many villagers used this opportunity to expand cultivation in the forest. After the war, it was difficult for the Indonesian Forest Service to get this land back. As in India, people's need for agriculture land has brought them into conflict with the forest department's desire to control the land and exclude people from it. New developments in forestry. Since the 1980s, governments across Asia and Africa have begun to see that scientific forestry and the policy of keeping forest communities away from forests has resulted in many conflicts. Conservation of forests rather than collecting timber has become a more important goal. The government has recognized that in order to meet this goal, the people who live near the forest must be involved. In many cases across India, from Mizoram to Kerala, dense forests have survived only because villagers protected them in sacred groves known as sarnas, deva, devarkudu, can, rai, etc. Some villages have seen patrolling their own forests, with each household taking it in turns instead of leaving it to the forest guards. Local forest communities and environmentalists today are thinking of different forms of forest management activities. Have there been changes in forest areas where you live? Find out what these changes are and what they have happened. Write a dialogue between a colonial forester and an Adivasi discussing the issue of hunting in the forest. Questions. The question number 1. Discussing how the change in the forest management in the colonial period affected the following groups of people: shifting cultivators, nomadic and pastoralist communities, films trading in timber forest produce, plantation owners, kings, British officials engaged in shikar hunting. What are the similarities between colonial management of the forest in Bastar and in Java? Between 1880 and 1920, forest cover in the Indian subcontinent declined by 9.7 million hectares from 108.6 million hectares to 98.9 million hectares. Discuss the role of the following factors in this decline: railway, shipbuilding, agriculture expansion, commercial farming, tea coffee plantations, Adivasi and other peasant users. And question number 4. Why are forests affected by wars? Thank you.